There was no music in the prison camp, just the sound of restless men waiting for a war to end. Beyond the barracks stood fences topped with barbed wire. Guard towers watched over rows of crowded buildings near the Baltic coast of Germany. Inside one of those buildings, a young American officer struggled against an enemy he had never expected to face: hopelessness. Only months earlier, he had been flying a B-24 bomber over occupied Europe. Then, in February of 1944, his aircraft was shot down over Holland. He survived the fall, but German soldiers captured him and sent him to Stalag Luft I, a prisoner of war camp for Allied airmen. Because he was an officer, he was not required to perform forced labor. That may sound merciful, but it left him with endless empty hours. He began carving small wooden airplanes with a pocket knife. It gave his hands something to do, but eventually even that was not enough. Then one day he heard another prisoner whistling an old tune called Red Wing. The melody carried him far beyond the prison walls. He remembered growing up on a Minnesota farm during the Depression. He remembered country dances and the uncle who had given him a violin when he was 7 years old. Most of all, he remembered something his father used to tell him while repairing broken farm machinery. You can make something out of nothing. You just have to find a way. Standing inside a German prison camp, the young officer decided to do exactly that. He would build a violin. There was only one problem. He had no proper wood, tools, strings, glue, or bow. He began looking beneath the bunks. The wooden bed slats could become the front and back of the instrument. Other pieces came from table legs and aid cartons. He shaped the wood with his pocket knife. For the more delicate work, he used broken pieces of glass and a table knife ground into a crude chisel. The curved sides were created by soaking thin strips of wood in water and heating them over a stove. Other prisoners joined the effort. They scraped hardened glue from chairs and the bottoms of tables. The scrapes were collected, boiled, and used again. A German guard helped obtain catgut for the strings. A bow was acquired by trading cigarettes from Red Cross parcels. For 4 months, the officer carved, scraped, bent, and fitted the pieces together. The project became more than a way to fill the hours. It gave the men something to watch, something to discuss, something to believe might actually be completed. Finally, the violin was ready. The officer placed it beneath his chin and drew the bow across the strings. A clear note sounded inside the barracks. Against every reasonable expectation, the violin worked. On Christmas Eve in 1944, the prisoners gathered in the cold. Most were thinking about families they feared they might never see again. The officer lifted the instrument and began playing Silent Night. One by one, the prisoners joined him. Then another voice entered the song. A German guard was standing nearby, singing the familiar words in his own language. For a few moments, the fences remained, and the war continued. But the men on the opposite sides were connected by the same melody. The camp was liberated in the spring of 1945. The officer carried his handmade violin home. It later traveled across the United States in an exhibition about prisoners of war and was heard in concert halls by millions of visitors. For more than 50 years, however, it was mostly kept safely in its case as a treasured reminder of what patience and resourcefulness could create. The officer rarely spoke about his imprisonment, but music quietly spread through his family. His son became a professional orchestra bassist. One grandson became a cellist. His granddaughter, Jennifer Mondi, became a violinist with the National Symphony Orchestra. The violin created behind barbed wire eventually entered the collection of the National World War II Museum, where its unlikely body of bed slats, table legs, and scavenged materials continues to tell its story. The young pilot, who made something out of almost nothing, was Lieutenant Clair Cline. He could not escape the prison camp on his own, but with a pocket knife, broken glass, and an old melody, he found a way to carry himself and the men around him beyond its walls. This has been Twist of Fate Radio. I'm Angela Clark. Until next time, remember, sometimes the smallest choices lead to the biggest consequences. Want to explore more stories like this? Visit twistoffateradio.com. There you can read more details about this story and others like it. Plus, you can submit your own Twist of Fate story to be considered for a future episode. You never know what twist of fate is coming next.